Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to everyone, and most welcome to this launch of the new Global Fund for Coral Reefs. My name is Ulrika Moder. I am the Director of the Bureau for External Relations and Partnerships with UNDP, and I am truly delighted to have the possibility to moderate and accompany today's session with the launch of the Global Fund for Coral Reef, which will feature statements from a number of hugely important international leaders representing governments, UN agencies, NGOs, and the private sector, interested, as we all should be, to save reefs and strengthen the resilience of dependent communities. So why are we here today? Well, as we are all painfully aware of, global climate change and localized anthropogenic stressors are driving rapid declines in coral health. And the loss of coral reef ecosystems not only puts at risk one of the richest resources of biodiversity on our planet, but also the security and livelihoods of 500 million people that rely on them. In the face of this urgent crisis, it is time to act. And it's not too late to do so. But as we will learn today, resources for coral reef conservation fall too short of what is needed. So to address this coral reef funding gap, as we call it, a global coalition of partners has developed a blended finance instrument known as the Global Fund for the Coral Reefs, the GFCR. And the idea is that we can together catalyze private sector investments in coral reef conservation and the blue economy. So our objective here today is to introduce to you the fund, explain why it has been established, how it will work, but then of course also to request your full support to help us to capitalize it, to implement it, and accompany us on this exciting journey. Today's event is comprised of 3 sessions with distinguished speakers. The session 1 is a call for action and the value of a public-private partnership and what this can bring. The session 2 is about challenges and opportunities in the COVID-19 context, but also reminding us that this is still the super year for nature. And the session 3 is about developing an investment vision for the blue economy. Please take note that the live chat is available for your questions and interaction with us. And we will start with a short video from the International Coral Reef Initiative about the vibrant wonders of coral reefs and the services that they can provide to us and future generations. So let's start being inspired and look at the possibilities. Now, as I shared with you, the first session is about the call for action and the value of a public-private partnership. And in this session, the core actors of the Global Fund for the Coral Reefs will discuss their role in the fund and the complementary expertise of private foundation, UN agencies, and financial institutions to build resilience at scale. The session includes words from government officials on the need for global coral reef conservation programs. And our first speaker is His Serene Highness, the Princess Albert II of Monaco.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to the organizers of this exchange in which I regret not being able to take part live. Please allow me to thank all of you for agreeing to participate. At this difficult time, when so many urgent imperatives are imposed on our diaries, it is particularly appreciable and encouraging to see that we haven't forgotten coral reefs. The situation continues to worsen and should be an ongoing concern for us all. These essential ecosystems, which are home to over 25% of all known marine biodiversity, are facing multiple, potentially fatal threats. Global warming, pollution, degradation of the marine ecosystems, and ocean acidification are rendering them fragile a little more each day. In its special report on oceans published in Monaco 1 year ago, the IPCC estimated that without resolute action on our part, 70 to 90% of corals could vanish within the next 30 years. The IPCC added that to have a chance of saving corals, we would need to take actions within the next decade. However, we know that one of the main issues encountered by coral stewards is lack of resources. Even though they carry out key ecosystem services, even though they play a pivotal role in the preservation of biodiversity and coastal protection, in particular in the face of the effects of climate change, corals are too often neglected, abandoned, or destroyed. Faced with such a situation, we cannot remain inactive. That is why, together with the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation, my foundation has taken the initiative for the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. I'm delighted to see this excellent project taking shape today, thanks to the commitment of several United Nations agencies and partners from the private sector. I would like to pay special tribute to the UNDP and BNP Paribas teams who enabled this project to make significant strides despite the difficult circumstances in which we currently find ourselves. Your commitment should enable us to take more efficient and more rapid action to protect corals by developing innovative financial mechanisms and promoting their contribution to the economy, both locally and globally, more effectively. However, this action also needs to be completed at other levels. I'm thinking of support for the work carried out by scientists, many of whom are focusing on corals, as is the case at the Monaco Scientific Center. They can help us identify solutions, even new strains, that are resistant to bleaching. That is why we need to support them. I'm also thinking of the development of marine protected areas, which we need to step up, as this enables us to take better account of these particularly sensitive areas and to implement mechanisms for protecting them more efficiently. Above all, I'm thinking of the fight against climate change and its consequences, namely ocean acidification and coral bleaching. We cannot ignore the fact that it is, above all, by reducing the damage of a carbon economy that we will be able to protect corals sustainably. All these actions, which we need to implement without delay, are not aimed exclusively at protecting the coral reefs. They're also aimed at protecting fragile ecosystems, endangered seas, a ravaged planet. That is the reason why we need to implement them without delay. That is the reason why today's meeting is so important. Thank you.
Thank you, His Highness, for this address, but not least for the long-term engagement that we need to see. Next, I'm honored to introduce a colleague of ours from the UN, Ms. Inger Anderson, the Executive Director of the United Nations Environmental Programme, UNEP.
Thank you very much for inviting me to say a few words at this important event. My sincere thanks to His Serene Highness Prince Albert II of Monaco for his strong leadership of the oceans agenda. Indeed, this leadership is a shining example that small countries can make a mighty roar. We thank Monaco for the stewardship and support of environmental causes. My thanks also to the Prince Albert II Foundation and to the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation and to a host of UN partners for organizing this event. We are here today because one of the Earth's richest sources of biodiversity is under grave threat. Coral reefs are found in more than 100 countries and provide billions of dollars in ecosystem goods and services. But despite the recognition of just how valuable coral reefs are to life, to prosperity, and to the future we want, we've not been able to sufficiently fund the protection of these valuable assets. Too little is invested in coral reef protection. And more importantly, slow climate action is acidifying our waters and warming our oceans and undercutting the very viability of coral reefs. But reefs are critical. They are where fish spawn. They are where much of our nutrition lies. But they are also the host to some of the most magnificent and unique biodiversity. And of course, they provide critical natural infrastructure that protect and buffer us against high storms and seas. Now, all life emerged from the ocean. And so it's very fitting that we are here today to step up for this critical initiative. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs aims to address a critical investment gap. I sincerely hope that together we can narrow this gap. Let us deploy these resources to mobilize more from the private sector, from the finance sector, from the fisheries sector, from the tourism sector, and from the conservation sector. We at UNEP stress the need for the unique and critical contribution of coral reef ecosystems to be recognized and integrated into the post-2020 biodiversity framework. And here, the recommendation made by the International Coral Reef Initiative to the Convention for Biodiversity is significant. We remain committed to seizing this important opportunity that lies ahead, to advocate for the protection, the wise use, and the management and restoration of coral reef ecosystems. This includes the UN Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development and the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration that begins in 2021. But most importantly, it means stretching for an ambitious biodiversity agreement in Kunming COP15 and, of course, to have ambitious and stretched NDCs that will reduce carbon emissions and therefore protect our coral reef systems in line with the Paris Agreement made in 2015. We urge the global community to come together to capitalize this critical fund in order to change the trajectory for coral reefs and to save these precious ecosystems. If COVID-19 has taught us anything, it is that we must do a far better job of understanding and managing risk. Even if we limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade, we still run the risk of losing 90% of the world's coral reef cover. A future without coral reefs is one we cannot begin to imagine. And so together, we must do all we can to prevent this. I look forward to hearing more about the outcomes of this important deliberation, and thank you for your efforts.
Thank you so much, Inger, and colleagues with UNEP and the critical contribution that you will play also with regard to the fund. And it is true that we really need, and this is only the beginning of an innovative partnership, bringing together in common global platform, private foundations, UN organizations, global private financial actors, and key member states to see to that we support the ocean and that we have a future where the coral reefs can be that inspiration that we saw in the film clip in the very beginning. Now, I'm happy to introduce my close and dear colleague, Mr. Achim Steiner, the administrator of UNDP. Please go ahead, Achim, and you are with us live.
Thank you, Rika. I hope you can hear me now. I can hear you and see you.
We hear you well. Please go ahead.
So let me begin where also Inga began just now, which is to recognize His Serene Highness Prince Albert II of Monaco and the leadership that he has brought for so many years, particularly on issues that relate to marine life. And therefore, it is very fitting to have had him kick off today's launch of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. And I'm very pleased to join Inga and my colleagues and all those who will speak in the course of this launch to congratulate, first of all, everyone who has been part of shaping this idea, but also the partners who have now joined in giving not just the world an idea, but really to step up and actually make it a reality. Both His Highness and Inga just spoke to the logic, the rationale, the necessity and the imperative of what it is that this Global Fund for Coral Reefs is setting out to do. So let me not preach to the converted about facts that I think we're all familiar with. We are facing a situation that clearly, both in terms of threat and the vitality of life in the oceans, but even human well-being, is so inextricably linked to the health of our coral reefs. And for so many reasons that we're familiar with, the outlook for coral reefs is indeed a bleak one, a bleached one in many parts of the world already, and one that therefore deserves our attention. And I believe that just on the eve of the United Nations General Assembly, also hosting on the 30th of September a UN Biodiversity Summit in the General Assembly, it is important to remind ourselves that biodiversity, and particularly life in the oceans, that goal that captured so much of what actually defines life on our planet, needs our attention, not as just an issue, an agenda item, but really as a foundational piece for life on this planet. We're also having this UN Biodiversity Summit, and we are launching this global fund in the midst of a pandemic. And I think it bears reminding ourselves that so much of what is happening right now in the minds of us as individuals, but also collectively in our communities, our parliaments, and here in the United Nations, the place where the world talks to each other about what matters and what comes next. The narrative of building back or building forward better is one that I think speaks to many of the aspirations also of this global fund. And the blue economy being one of those that I think will emerge out of this reflection on what next, as perhaps a more central and a more proactive part of, first of all, how nations work together, but also how we at local and national level take better care. The GCRF, the Global Coral Reef Fund, GFCR, sorry, GCRF is another abbreviation. This is our life in the United Nations. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs is, however, a tool. It is not an end in itself. It is a means to an end. And I think I would like to end by referring to it really as that capacity to invest together, because that is really touching on one of the fundamentals that so much of the 2030 agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, depends on. Finance and funding are a way in which we can empower, we can trigger, we can catalyze actions, but we can also reset signals in our economy. This fund is not just about public investment, it is also about attracting private investors. But it is investment not just in the narrow sense of a return on investment, it is a public good that we're investing in, where both private, public, we as citizens individually, but collectively can benefit from this investment. I hope that in UNDP, being very much part of the launching partnership with the Paul G. Allen Foundation alongside the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, but also our colleagues in BNP Paribas, in UNEP, in the UN Capital Development Fund, and as investment managers also Mirova and Natixis, we have formed a nucleus that will attract many partners very quickly to an idea whose time is long overdue, but also its ability to prove that this is a viable way of moving forward and investing together truly has come. For UNDP, we remain deeply committed to the success of the fund, embedded in the larger attempt to try and help the world over the next decade to find a way back to meeting the targets and indicators, but above all, the aspiration of the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Akim. And over to you, Midori, leading this important work on behalf of UNDP.
Thank you, Rika. So I speak to this slide. So coral reef conservation can allow progress for more than 13 SDGs. So reefs provide 70% of protein in diets in Pacific Island and contribute $36 billion to the global tourism industry annually, and also protect $6 billion of built capital from flooding. So coral reef provides subsistence and livelihoods for many, many millions of people around the world. Thanks.
Thank you, Midori. And now I am happy to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Bill Hilf, who is the CIO of Vulcan Inc., representing the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation. And I hope, Bill, that we have you with us. Please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
We can. Please
Excellent.
go ahead.
Well, good morning from Seattle, or at least from my basement in Seattle. It's a true honor to participate today I'd like to thank our partners, UNDP and UNEP, for hosting this great event. And of course, His Serene Highness Prince Albert II for his excellent remarks and collaboration on the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. As you know and have heard, coral reefs are at the front line of climate change, and the livelihoods and food security of almost 1 billion people hang in the balance here. And just yesterday, the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5 reported that coral reefs have shown the most rapid increase in extinction risk of all the biodiversity assessed groups due to climate change and other human pressures. The coral reef crisis has been compounded by a lack of resources for reef conservation and restoration. One recent study found that only 0.01% of climate finance by the major multilateral development banks was dedicated to coral reefs. But despite these dire predictions, despite all these statistics you're hearing, if we act with urgency over the next decade, we can really alter the trajectory of this coral reef crisis. But how will we make this difference? Well, this global fund for coral reefs will use blended finance, governments, philanthropy, private sector all working together to mobilize resources to unlock climate finance for coral reefs and to develop a pipeline of approaches to provide sustainable funding for coral reef restoration and conservation. Now, whether that's breakthrough research using things like assisted gene flow, cryogenics, larval restoration, or continuing high-res mapping and monitoring of the world's reefs, or support for global policy change, there is hope to save these critical ecosystems. It's a matter of resource allocation that needs to match the scope and urgency of the situation. So we're all asking all of you to join us as a donor, as an implementing partner, as a thought leader, to help save the world's coral reefs. It's not too late, but we must act now, and we must act with urgency. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bill, for that encouragement. It's not too late, but we need to act with urgency. Now I am pleased to introduce the next speaker to the floor, Lord Zach Goldsmith, Minister of State for Pacific and the Environment of the United Kingdom. Please, Zach, over to you, and I hope that you are with us with sound and your image.
Good morning. Though I can't join you live today, it is a pleasure to be speaking to you about why a global fund for coral reefs is so important. This pandemic has exposed our vulnerabilities, economically, of course, but it is also a wake-up call to profoundly reset our relationship with the natural world. Coronavirus is almost certainly the consequence of our abuse of nature. But the science is very clear that the current crisis will be dwarfed by others: climate change, environmental degradation. We know all too well what damage we are doing to the natural world. Only last week, the Living Planet Index revealed that populations of key species have declined by a staggering 68% since 1970. By the time I finish speaking to you today, we will have lost the equivalent of roughly 150 football pitches worth of forest. And the problem, of course, is not limited to land. Our ocean is a kaleidoscopic treasure trove of marvels and mysteries, so many of them yet to be discovered. It's where life began, and it is essential for all life on Earth. And yet we're actively destroying our ocean, and with it, our very foundations. A third of marine mammals are threatened with extinction. Almost 2/3 of our coastal wetlands are degraded. Nearly a third of all fisheries have gone, or they're on the brink of going. It's a tragedy in and of itself, but it is also an unfolding tragedy for humans too, because it is invariably the poorest who suffer most when vital services that nature provides begin to fail. Over 1 billion people depend on fish for their main source of protein. 1 in 10 of us relies on the ocean for our livelihoods, and around 1 billion people live less than 10 meters above sea level. So reversing this grim trend is surely the principal challenge of our age. Now, this event is to galvanize support for our coral reefs, in many ways a litmus test for the health of our warmer, more acidic ocean. Appallingly, half of all reef systems have already been destroyed. Even if we manage to keep within 1.5 degrees of warming, which we must, we still risk losing between 70 and 90% of global coral reefs. Fewer than 1% would survive 2 degrees of warming. It's a devastating trajectory, and it spells disaster for the quarter of marine species that are supported by coral reefs, for at least 500 million people who depend on reefs for food or coastal protection and for their livelihoods. The ocean matters greatly to the UK. Through our overseas territories, we are the stewards of some of the most spectacular warm water reefs around the world, ecosystems rich in biodiversity that provide irreplaceable services to millions of people. And I'm proud that our blue belt of marine protected areas around our overseas territories is on track to protect an area of ocean the size of India, including cold and warm water coral reefs from the biodiversity jewel of Ascension Island to the subantarctic wilderness of South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. And I'm excited that we are soon to launch a new £500 million Blue Planet Fund financed from the UK's ODA budget and designed to help eligible countries protect marine resources from the key human-generated threats: climate change, marine pollution, overfishing, illegal fishing, habitat loss. We're taking action to help turn things around, and as presidents of COP26, we'll make the case at every opportunity, but we cannot do it alone. A global investment in coral reef protection needs to be 5 times the current levels. So I really do commend the co-founders of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs for taking up this huge and very important challenge. We share one global ocean and we need a whole Earth effort. And I'm delighted that 32 countries have already joined our Global Ocean Alliance to protect at least 30% of the global ocean in marine protected areas in the course of this decade. And I invite every nation to join us. This is the moment for a seismic shift. We know we cannot solve climate change without restoring and protecting nature on a massive scale. We know that doing so will also help us reverse the biodiversity crisis and prevent poverty. And we believe that nature-based solutions could provide around 1/3 of the cost-effective solutions that we're going to need by 2030. That they attract just 3% of global climate investment makes absolutely no sense. So it's clear that governments everywhere are going to need to step up. And we have an opportunity to do so right now. Every nation faces a choice as we rebuild and renew. Governments around the world have put aside roughly $11 trillion to reboot their economies. How we invest that money will have ramifications for decades to come. And we have a choice. We can choose to lock in decades of environmental destruction and carbon emissions, or we can turn this grim experience to something good. And we can make sustainability and resilience the lens through which we map out our respective recoveries. We have a duty to act now and on behalf of every generation to come. Thank you all so much for what you do.
Thank you, Zach Goldsmith, and thank you for the Leadership UK. We look forward to have you accompanying us on this important journey, and thank you for speaking out about the funding gap, but also the important possibilities that we actually find as we come together here today. Now, our next distinguished guest is Mr. Norbert Bartel, who is the Parliamentary State Secretary to the Federal Minister of Economic Cooperation and Development of Germany, another really important country working very closely also with UNP, and I'm happy to introduce Norbert Bartel, please.
2020 was supposed to become the ocean super year. The COVID-19 pandemic is showing us one more time how important it is to protect our vital natural resources. Important international conferences have been postponed, but we must not lose our focus on the importance of oceans for climate action, biodiversity conservation, and sustainable development. Oceans are the basis of our lives. They regulate the global climate, produce oxygen, and serve as a sink for human-made carbon emissions. Oceans feed us. Worldwide, 3.2 billion people get more than 20% of their protein they need from fish. But the state of our oceans and of ecosystems such as coral reefs, mangrove forests, and seagrass beds are alarming. Pollution, overfishing, and climate change are putting pressure on oceans and coasts. Coral reefs suffer because oceans are becoming more acidic and warmer. Over the last 150 years, the stocks of healthy corals have been reduced by half. And if we continue with business as usual, about 70 to 90% of all coral reefs will be lost by 2030. More than 500 million of the world's poorest people are dependent on coral reefs. Many partner countries of the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development are islands or coastal nations. Marine conservation is therefore an important element of our policy. We are working for the international goal of putting 30% of the oceans under protection. The Blue Action Fund is the world's largest public fund for the conservation and improvement of marine protected areas and sustainable fisheries. Together with Sweden and France, we help non-governmental organizations to increase their efforts for the protection of marine biodiversity. These projects currently protect and manage more than 200,000 square kilometers, an area the size of Senegal. The projects support local development and sustainable livelihoods in coastal communities. We are helping to protect the source of livelihood for more than 250,000 people in coastal areas. And this year, the Blue Action Fund will expand its activities. It will now also work on adaptation to climate change. These projects will protect and restore coastal ecosystems such as the mangrove forests, seagrass beds, and coral reefs. And the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, GFCR, complements these efforts. It is a very important and innovative element for the protection of coral reefs in developing countries. The fund combines the efforts of governments, international organizations, businesses, and private individuals. It shows that we can only tackle global challenges together. The upcoming UN Decade of Ocean Science will be decisive for our planet. We have to make stronger investments than ever before in protecting coral reefs and preserving the source of livelihood of more than 500 million people. And last but not least, Germany will therefore look for ways in which it can support the GFCR.
Thank you so much, Germany and the Parliamentary States Secretary for Economic Cooperation, Norbert Bartel. And as I said, we are truly happy to have Germany accompany us in this endeavor. Now, let's have a closer look at the funding gap that you will see on this upcoming slide. Because as we know, the answer is just not to increase financing, but also to provide better structuring and sequencing of the financing. And the Global Fund for Coral Reefs will demonstrate this by using grants to set up the right technical assistance, by mobilizing working capital, and replicate the model to build an investment portfolio. And we will also provide technical assistance and monitor progress towards goal. So yes, reminding us about the gap, the funding gap, but also that we, all of us working on this platform, really need to see to that we provide better coordination, structuring, and financing, as we need to do this the right way right now. Now, our next speaker is Mr. Antoine Sear, the Director of the Company Engagement at one of the financial institutions in the world, BNP Paribas. Over to you, Antoine, and I hope that you are with us.
Thank you, and good afternoon for Paris. Do you hear me?
We hear you well. Please go ahead.
So
Most welcome.
So good afternoon from Paris. At BNP Paribas, we have put the 17 SDGs in our global corporate project. You know, it's part of the project that is given to any BNP Paribas employee. And we have a blended finance agreement with UN to channel $10 billion public and private investment by 2024 into commercially viable projects that benefit environment and communities. Regarding SDG 14, sustainability and conservation for ocean and marine resources, it is very high in our roadmap since, for example, we have committed 1 billion euros to green shipping, and we have 100 million euros committed to startups in blue and green economy. And what is important is that blue is really part of this, and of course we are working with a lot of organizations that are involved and signed the Poseidon Principles and so on. So it is for us the right momentum. We believe it's a right momentum for a global fund for coral reefs as what I would call a blended finance breakthrough initiative. Coral reefs are the home of a vast marine biodiversity and are part of our world natural heritage. They are really common good that we all need to care about, and when I'm telling all, it clearly includes finance. No organization can win in a world that loses, and clearly we know that coral reefs are part of all the threats that are coming around climate change and other stress factors for our world and our biodiversity. Indeed, coral reefs have a tremendous economic and social value, not only ecological, but also economic and social. And if they are safeguarded, they can provide investors and local communities with important opportunities in several sectors and activities like marine protected areas, implementation, fisheries, aquaculture, and eco-tourism. We believe that finance sector has now the capacity to access to the right partners and investors that are not only looking for financial returns, but that wants to meet also social and environmental objectives. And BNP Paribas will contribute to reach those partners and investors and really consider how we can contribute to unlock resources for the Global Fund for Coral Reef. This project obviously will happen only if all the actors play their role, and the participation of public partners and investors is important. So the public partners can offer guarantees and junior investment, and they will have clearly, they will be a key in unlocking private investment to go into the fund. In this project, BNP Paribas is prepared to partner with the UN agencies and other financial institutions in the setup of the fund. And when the conditions of its viability will have been reached, our teams, of course, are ready to do their best to reach all our financial ecosystem to make it successful, to reach our clients, our partners. So we are very enthusiastic about this project.
Thank you so much, Antoine, for these inspiring words. And you're right, we see increasing number of impact investors every day, but we need this leadership and we also need words to come into action. So thank you so much for accompanying us on this journey and setting the example in this sense. Now I'm going to present, and we will have some few words from Jaime Rodriguez Romero from Costa Rica, and he is the Vice Minister of Water and Seas.
Good morning. Costa Rica welcomes the opportunity to participate in this event. Thank you to His Serene Highness Prince Albert II of Monaco, his foundation, and the United Nations. 2020 is teaching us about resilience, adaptation, and cooperation. We live an unprecedented crisis. COVID-19 is one of them, but we are facing also climate change and biodiversity loss. This is the time to create innovative responses and to be united. Any recovery plan should include the ocean as a solution, the ocean as hope. Costa Rica is leading with France the High Ambition Coalition for People and Nature to ensure the conservation of at least 30% of land and the ocean by 2030. We believe the solution to the crisis is in nature. Our common responsibility is to promote these solutions, to let nature be. In this sense, healthy coral reefs are key to ensure a healthy, productive, and resilient ocean. That is why, in Costa Rica, we recently established the National Coral Reefs Council to increase research, monitoring, and coordination between institutions to protect these ecosystems. We also have developed a guideline to coral restorations as part of the adaptation actions. We aim to have an updated baseline of our coral reefs, including the knowledge of their DNA for the following years. Public-private partnerships are key to ensure that we can protect our future by protecting our coral reefs. Working together with scientists, communities, industries, and NGOs is fundamental. Our individual efforts won't be enough if we don't work together at the international level. We need to work for building more capacities. We need to share our lessons learned. But more important, we need to increase finance to support more nature-based solutions. We reiterate our full support to establish the Coral Reef Fund and to build together blue solutions for today and the future generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heidi, and we count on your full support, as we know Costa Rica always being such a strong leader within this field, and looking forward to continued partnership. Now we have come to the final speaker of this session, and that is Mr. Josh Thomas, who's CEO of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, to discuss a complementary initiative underway in Australia. So let's listen to Josh in a pre-recorded video.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about the Global Fund for Coral Reefs and to the coalition of partners that's made this event possible. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the Great Barrier Reef region and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. The Great Barrier Reef is one of the best known, diverse ecosystems on Earth. It's known for its intrinsic beauty worldwide, but it's also an economic powerhouse for Australia. It contributes some 64,000 jobs here and some $6.4 billion worth of tourism economy. The Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority is proud to have been working closely with the Queensland Government for some 40 years in managing this precious estate. In recent years, we have seen climate change impacting negatively on the Great Barrier Reef. Those impacts are felt around the world, in coral reef environments around the world, and the Marine Park Authority continues to call on all partners to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions and alleviate climate pressures on these precious environments. In addition to climate pressures, the Marine Park Authority continues to manage closely other impacts on the Great Barrier Reef, such as illegal fishing, coastal development, predation by crown of thorns starfish and poor water quality. Now, the Australian Government, together with the Queensland Government, has a sophisticated plan in place, the Reef 2050 Long-Term Sustainability Plan. Under this plan, we work with partners, different sectors, different organisations, all with a keen interest in protecting the Great Barrier Reef. Working collaboratively is the only way we are going to address some of these interjurisdictional challenges facing our natural environments. Under the Reef 2050 plan, it's really important to note there's nearly some $500 million been invested for innovation through the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, recognising that we need new, adaptive, innovative approaches to taking on some of these challenges. I'd note that the Global Fund for Coral Reefs also has a public-private philanthropic element to it. I think that's a wonderful sign of the understanding that the global coral reef community has about the need to work together, to collaborate, to share ideas in addressing some of the problems facing our coral reefs. Australia is proud at the moment to be working with Indonesia and Monaco on the International Coral Reef Initiative, a forum through which we can exchange ideas, exchange knowledge, exchange solutions about how to manage coral reefs around the world. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs, I think, is similar, and a real opportunity for not just funding and projects, but for knowledge exchange. We've come so far already, and I really commend it to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh. Now let me introduce you to the fund's theory of change. It targets 4 outcomes. 1, protection of priority coral reef sites and climate refugia. 2, transformation of the livelihoods and economies of coral reef dependent communities and sectors away from degradation. And 3, restoration of coral reefs through new technologies and adaptive approaches. And 4 is recovery of coral reef dependent communities in the face of major shocks such as natural disasters, health crises, and economic shocks. Thank you. Over to you, Ulrika.
Thank you, Midori, and thanks to all of you who have been accompanying us in this first session, where you can really see the strong commitment that we have for the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. And you have, with your participation, confirmed that the fund is a game-changing instrument, or at least it can be if we continue to work together. That will actually help us to see to that we can bring back coral reefs from the edge of collapse. We can now dare to reimagine our future with coral reefs rather than without them. So with these words, let's move into the session 2, which is about challenges and opportunities in the COVID-19 context, and reminding us that this is still the super year for nature. 2020 was declared the super year for nature, and it should be the opportunity that we have promised ourselves and future generations to chart a course of slowing climate breakdown and protecting biodiversity over the next decade. And despite the pandemic pushing back major environmental conferences, the fight to save biodiversity and build resilience is even more important as ever. We have an opportunity to build back better, or perhaps as we say now, build forward better, transform our relationship with nature, not only to save it, but to make our communities stronger. And as I saw one of the participants in the chat function say, think big, think system change, but also let's do system change. Now it's my pleasure to introduce another friend and distinguished speaker of session 2, and His Excellency Peter Thomason, the United Nations Special Envoy for the Ocean, who I had the pleasure to work with as I, from the Swedish member states side at that time, prepared the first Oceans Conference. Over to you, Peter.
Ladies and gentlemen, all courtesies observed, and greetings to everyone gathered here with us in cyberspace. My thanks to the organizers for the opportunity of speaking to you on this vital subject. My hometown in the South Pacific is surrounded on 3 sides by a coral barrier reef. That reef is our true interface with the ocean, and the protection it provides, along with its wide navigable passage, is the very reason our town exists in the first place. I find it incredibly difficult to imagine a world without coral reefs, but that is essentially what the IPCC has forecast will be the case once we go through the dreaded line of 2 degrees Celsius global warming. If that sounds extreme to you, I ask you to consider for a moment that current trends, as presented by the World Meteorological Organization, have us on a trajectory that takes us to somewhere between 3 and 5 degrees Celsius global warming before the end of the century. That, ladies and gentlemen, is our predicament. To emphasize, WMO's recently released United in Science 2020 report shows that the climate crisis has not stopped for the COVID-19 pandemic and that our GHG emissions in the atmosphere are at record levels and are continuing to increase. Thus, my central message is that whatever angle you're coming at from in coral's defense, our main enemy is our burgeoning levels of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, and that it is everyone's responsibility to do whatever we can to bring in the required transformations to our patterns of consumption, production, and habitat destruction in order to get us to a carbon-neutral world by 2050. Of course, there are many other measures we can take to mitigate on coral's behalf, many measures applying the best of science and innovation to build resilience for coral reefs, both locally and at regional and global levels. But these measures will not occur at the scale required without financial support for those at the front lines of research and implementation. And that is why the Global Fund for Coral Reefs is such a vital measure for our times. Ladies and gentlemen, I recently participated in the launch of the OECD's Sustainable Ocean for All report. The report shows that between 2013 and 2018, less than 1% of global official development assistance, ODA, supported sustainable ocean-based economic activities. When you think of the ocean's immense importance to human well-being, and indeed to planetary well-being, I can only describe that as a dereliction. It is well known that of all the SDGs, SDG 14 attracts the least funding. And if I'm asked to categorize that situation, the most charitable words would be short-sighted. A recent report of the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy demonstrated that for every dollar invested in select areas of ocean-based economic activities, such as offshore wind for renewable energy or greening of shipping or nature-based solutions, there's a return of $5. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that if you put a dollar value on coral reefs for what they give industries like tourism and fishing, and factor in their biodiversity and foreshore and harbor protection values, the economic case for protecting coral is just overwhelming. Ladies and gentlemen, when we gather in Lisbon next year at the Ocean Conference to strengthen our support for the faithful implementation of SDG 14, I'm confident the good works arising from the Global Fund for Coral Reefs will be clearly evident. I urge all in a position now to do so, to provide the fund with the means required for those works to be undertaken without delay, so that we may turn the tide on coral's destruction. And I thank you for your attention to my words.
And we, of course, thank Peter Thompson for your leadership in the work of the oceans, and thanking you also for reminding us about the funding gap, mentioning that less than 1% of the SDG budget is allocated to life below water, even though every second breath we take come from the resources below water. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Her Excellency Louis Michel Young, the permanent representative of Belize and chair of the Alliance of Small Island States. And it was said in the very beginning that small countries can truly make a difference, and you can. So please, over to you.
Thank you very much, and a very good morning to you all. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to say a few words on the challenges and opportunities for SIDS in this super year of nature in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So small island developing states are home to more than 25% of the world's total coral reefs. And historically, Through industries such as tourism and fisheries, they have provided a number of critical benefits to our island communities, including food security, coastal protection, and economic growth. The escalating and often irreversible impacts of climate change, including rise in ocean temperatures and ocean acidification, have already taken a severe toll on our reefs. Documented since 1997, marine heat waves have already caused large-scale coral bleaching events, and these are becoming more frequent. The outcome is worldwide reef degradation. Almost all warm water coral reefs are projected to suffer a significant loss of area, resulting in the extinction of important species and changing the composition and diversity of remaining reefs. Even in the best case scenario, recovery can take up to 15 years. And during that time, we have lost the important ecosystem services they provide. Ocean tourism directly supports livelihoods of millions of people around the world, but is particularly integral to SIDS due to our limited economic diversification. For instance, in the Maldives and Palau, coral reef tourism alone contributes to over 40% of the GDP. It is obvious that SIDS have the most to lose due to coral reef degradation, and as a result, we have been strongly committed to sustainable ecosystem management and restoration, even with the limited resources at our disposal. Home to the second largest barrier reef in the world, my country, Belize, like many other SIDS, have illustrated this commitment by designating and implementing vast marine protected areas throughout our countries. Even as we grapple to safeguard coral reefs and the future of the tourism industry from the impacts of climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic swept across our nations, completely crippling the industry and all related and ancillary businesses as well. And many SIDS have no source of fiscal revenue while responding to the socio-economic impacts of the pandemic. And that is a situation that's further exacerbated by large and unsustainable debt burdens. We have yet to ascertain the duration and severity of the pandemic, and so the future outlook of the tourism industry remains uncertain. Nevertheless, efforts are already underway to revive this industry. Gingerly and out of necessity, many SIDS have reopened their borders and are providing incentives to boost tourist arrivals. It is a balancing act that is closely monitored. And as we work to revive and rebuild, we also need to think about how to also transform the tourism sector to make it more sustainable and in harmony with our natural resources and ecosystems, particularly coral reefs. Unsustainable practices, such as single-use plastics, must go. There also needs to be stricter rules and regulations governing cruise ships, those floating behemoths that cause millions in damage to our coral reefs each year. We also need to think of ways to make the industry cleaner and greener, to curb greenhouse gas emissions and alleviate the detrimental impacts of climate change on our reefs. Financial support packages for COVID-19 could invest in coral reef restoration and management, as well as research and development into more eco-friendly practices. SIDS don't lack the political will to make more progressive steps toward protecting our reefs, as demonstrated by our ambitious commitments at the Oceans Conference in 2017. What we are lacking is the resources to translate our aspirations into actions. It is in this context that we really do, we welcome the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, which seeks to invest $500 million in coral reef conservation between 2020 and 2030. In addition to restoring, protecting, and researching opportunities for coral reef resilience, it also seeks to empower local communities and enterprises that are reliant on these reefs, enabling transformation towards more sustainable livelihoods. And this is critical for all SIDS. I would like to then take this opportunity to express our sincere gratitude to the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation, BNP Paribas, Myrova Natkis Investment Managers, the UNDP, the UN Environmental Protection Fund, and the UNCDF for launching this timely and important initiative. We also call upon other countries and partner organizations to join in contributing to the fund. As with the scale of destruction that is currently happening, we need ample resources for a swift and commensurate response. So 2020 was envisioned as a super year for nature. And although COVID-19 has presented us with numerous challenges, we still have the opportunity to make this vision into a reality. Utilizing the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, there is vast potential for transformational change in the industries that so heavily depend on our fragile coral reefs and foster a more positive relationship with nature and climate, while also at the same time boosting economic recovery. I also call upon all countries to join the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, which will be endorsed ahead of the Biodiversity Summit at the Leaders Event for Nature and People on the 28th of September 2020. The pledge aims to convey a strong and united signal to take transformative actions for nature, climate, and people. So our actions today will determine the fate of 30% of the world's marine biodiversity and also enable future generations to continue to reap the benefits that coral reefs have to offer. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Michelle, for bringing us to Belize, but also to the reality of the small island developing, the small island states, and talking about both opportunities and responsibilities. And we will certainly work very closely with you and the leadership that you provide. Now, let me introduce our next speaker, Ms. Elizabeth Mrima, the Acting Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and as we know, an influential leader on biodiversity. So please, over to you, Elizabeth.
His Serene Highness Prince Albert II, Excellencies, distinguished co-panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I first wish to thank the organizers of this event and the founding partners of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs for inviting me to speak alongside such distinguished leaders. It is my great pleasure to highlight the valuable contribution that the Global Fund for Coral Reefs can have for the implementation of the Convention on Biological Diversity. For the past 10 years, efforts under the Convention have focused on achieving the Aichi biodiversity targets. These time-bound targets were adopted in 2010. We have now reached the 2020 deadline of the Aichi targets, and the parties to the Convention are now working to develop the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This framework is set to be adopted at the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention in 2021 and will contain a new set of global goals and targets to put a world on a path to a sustainable future for the planet. If we hope to right the ship and put the world on a course to a healthy future for the ocean, we must learn from both the successes and failures of the Aichi targets. Sadly, coral reefs are still in decline globally, and the Aichi Biodiversity Target 10 focused on addressing the multiple pressures on coral reefs is one of the targets in which we have made the least amount of progress. While protected area coverage increased globally, including for the corals, there has been insufficient action to address the root causes of coral reefs loss. In response to a lack of progress on Target 10, parties to the convention adopted the priority actions to achieve Aichi Biodiversity Target 10 for coral reefs and closely associated ecosystems in 2014. These actions aim to support the management of coral reefs as socio-ecological systems and to directly address the drivers of coral reefs loss. Unfortunately, implementation has continued to be lag behind. Coral reefs are often present in some of the poorest and most vulnerable parts of the world, outlining the need for more resources to support on-the-ground action in the post-2020 framework. This is why we at the Secretariat are so encouraged to see the development of this new global fund for coral reefs, which can bring much needed resources for the implementation of post-2020 framework and which focus on supporting a wide range of actions needed to support coral reefs and address the stressors impacting them. I urge and thank in advance all partners around the world to contribute to this fund as a major tool to support implementation of coral reefs. I likewise urged the convention parties to make use of this fund as a means to support their work in the future implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Efforts like this continue to highlight beacons of hope for a future with a healthy and productive ocean for the benefit of the planet and all of its inhabitants. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now over to you, Penny Stock.
Thank you, Ulrika. A quick slide on the funding ambition of GFCR. Our initial target is to raise $500 million in capital by 2030, $125 million in grants from government and philanthropic donors, and $375 million in private sector capital. Thanks.
Thank you for that information. And now we have come to the final presentation of this session too, and I am happy to introduce Mr. Yannick Glemarc, who's, as we know, the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund, GCF, which aims to expand collective human action to respond to climate change. So over to Yannick in a pre-recorded introduction of the work of GCF. And bear with us just a few seconds so we have the video coming up here.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests and colleagues, on behalf of the Green Climate Fund, it is an honor to be part of this initiative to address the coral reef funding gap. Too little attention has been paid to the impact of the climate crisis on coral reef. They are one of the most vulnerable ecosystems to climate change. At 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, coral reef will decline 7 to 90%. At 2 degrees Celsius, they could become non-existent. In turn, coral reef loss and degradation will threaten the livelihoods and security of more than 1 billion people who depend on them. Small island development states are particularly vulnerable to the destruction of coral reefs, as they are disproportionately dependent on their ecosystem goods and services for their survival. However, coral reefs are also vital for the health of every single nation on Earth. Coral reef and their associated ecosystem are essential to climate resilience and stability. In terms of adaptation to climate change, they protect people and property from extreme weather events through breaking as much as 97% of wave energy before waves reach the shore. In terms of climate mitigation, coral reef and associated ecosystems such as mangrove and seagrasses sequester and store more carbon per unit area than terrestrial forest. Even more important, most of this carbon is irrecoverable. In case of destruction, the carbon cannot be resequestered within 30 years, on time to avoid catastrophic climate change. Given the high irrecoverable carbon density, all mangroves, marshes, and seagrasses should also be considered global priorities for climate action. The Green Climate Fund is rapidly increasing its investment in coastal and marine ecosystems protection. One example is our Blue Action Fund project, which is an ecosystem-based adaptation program in the Western Indian Ocean. With a GCF grant financing of $34.1 million, we will support climate-focused marine and coastal conservation projects across 4 countries. However, we are witnessing a widening financing gap to protect and restore ecosystems worldwide. And this is particularly true for coral reefs. The growth in conservation and climate financing is not able to keep pace with the rapid coral cover loss resulting from climate-induced ocean warming and acidification. The objective of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs is to address this funding gap by leveraging limited public funding to catalyze much larger private flows for coral reefs protection. SEEDs and LDCs have hardly benefited from past blended finance efforts. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs aims to make blended finance work for the most vulnerable countries by bringing together an unprecedented coalition of global partners. From one of the largest commercial banks in the world, to member states, UN agencies, private foundations, and civil society organizations at the forefront of the fight to protect coral reefs. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs will rely on a variety of public and private financing instruments, including grants, guarantees, concessional loans, and equity, to de-risk investment portfolio and encourage private investments in the blue economy and conservation projects. It can do this for vulnerable countries that would otherwise not have access to such private investment by bringing them together to diversify risk and address market constraints. The fund will pilot innovative and scalable business models to reduce biodiversity loss, restore ecosystem, and conserve irrecoverable biomes. GCF works with a network of over 150 public and private, national and international organizations, and can provide a range of grant and non-grant instruments to support transformative climate initiatives. We stand ready to engage with the Global Fund for Coral Reefs Coalition on how to best leverage GCF strategic capabilities to support this initiative. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund, Yannick Glemarek. The next slide is about the design of the fund, which is built on blended finance. It's designed as a 10-year, $500 million blended finance vehicle with 2 windows, working under the same theory of change and a common investment plan, which is under development by the Conservation Finance Alliance. The fund will develop blended finance solutions that support the deployment of capital in blue economy markets. It will provide a combination of equity, debt, and grant funding in the right sequence with appropriate levels of de-risking. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Penny, and to all speakers of the second part of our session. In the interest of time, we will close this session 2 with a short video of a GCF-supported project in Tuvalu to build resiliency to climate change that I believe can inspire us. And then we are moving into our final session, which is about developing an investment vision for the blue economy. So stay with us, but first let's have a look at the inspiring video.
are injured, are suffering from the impacts of climate change. And this is a message that we have been calling out for urgent actions to help Tuvalu adapt to impacts.
As we look at this project as being very important to a country that wants to preserve its cultural identity and its economic viability, this project also stands to be transformative as the first large-scale project of its kind in the Pacific.
Urgently protect the islands of Tuvalu. Not only the physical islands, but also the people, their livelihood, culture, and their existence as a people.
So, in terms of work of GCF, of course, the Global Climate Fund, an important partner to this initiative. And now we are moving into the third and final session. I'm moderating. My name is Ulrika Moder. I'm with UNDP and I have a passion for the oceans. I'm really happy to be able to accompany this hopeful initiative. As I said, our final session is about the investment vision for blue economy. And here our last speakers will discuss blended finance and its potential to develop a pipeline of blue economy projects that can benefit coral reef conservation efforts. And our first speaker in this last but not least session is another dear colleague, Ms. Judith Carl, the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Capital Development Fund, working to make public and private finance work for the world's most vulnerable. So over to you, Judith.
Thank you so much, Ulrika. Can I be heard?
You can be heard, but yet not seen.
Okay.
But we hear you well, Judith.
Right.
Now we can see you as well. Please go ahead, and good to see you.
Thank you so much. And we're so part of this distinguished coalition of partners for the launch of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. Just on UNCDF, by way of background, we make public and private finance work for the poor at the household, small enterprise, and local infrastructure levels. We're the only UN entity mandated to focus primarily on the least developed countries, and we also have a unique capital mandate in the UN system, which allows us to use financial instruments like loans and guarantees to financially support small and medium enterprises and local investment projects to attract additional sources of finance, both public and private. For the global community to meet its urgent coral reef conservation ambitions, we need more private resources to be mobilized and invested in sustainable blue economy activities like sustainable tourism and sustainable fisheries. Innovative blended finance vehicles can play a key role, and the Global Fund for Coral Reefs aims to become a critical public-private financing mechanism to help fill this financial gap. It will establish a portfolio of marine conservation businesses that demonstrate business models that are both financially viable and scalable, therefore attracting much needed private finance for conservation. This portfolio approach will boost credibility and spread risks, which we believe will help attract investors to the fund. However, although blended finance in many instances has been able to catalyze significant private investment for sustainable development, there are still few examples of its application for businesses related to coral reefs and marine conservation. There's still limited understanding of viable blue economy business models in the market. Commercial investors perceive risks to be high, and they lack local knowledge and boots on the ground. This is where UNCDF's role in the Global Fund for Coral Reefs comes in. To help identify and de-risk potential investments, we will do the following. Together with Althelia, the fund manager, and part of Mirova Natural Capital, UNCDF will support the identification and development of a pipeline of investment-ready projects and businesses that the fund will invest in. This will include screening, financial credit assessment, and business advisory services. We will also use our financial instruments, notably catalytic loans and guarantees, to further help de-risk investments and demonstrate their readiness for financing from the fund. As needed through our presence on the ground, we will also provide post-investment technical assistance to companies and projects to ensure that they achieve financial viability and measurable development impact. UNCDF's role in partnering with the fund is to help demonstrate the investability of projects by providing catalytic public investments to reduce risks that help unlock private capital. This is the expertise and experience UNCDF can bring. We count on your support to capitalize the Global Fund for Coral Reefs in order to create a unique instrument to channel much needed investment capital toward coral reef conservation. Thank you so much. I'll bring it back to you.
Thank you so much, Judith and colleagues with UNCDF, for putting forward your assets and skill sets. You will be also incredibly important to the success of this. Penny, over to you to describe some of the investment modalities.
Yes, thank you. A word about the structure of the fund. So the fund is a trust fund with two complementary windows. A grant window managed by UN partners for technical assistance, capacity development, monitoring and evaluation, and emergency grants in times of crisis. And an investment window, which is managed by BNP and Althelia. The investment window will provide working capital to scale up interventions that protect reefs and support dependent communities and amplify impacts of initiatives incubated by the grant window. Thanks, Ulrika.
Thank you. I will, of course, make sure that all of those of you who are interested in details will get all the information needed. Now, I'm incredibly pleased to give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Satyendra Prasad of Fiji, Chair of the Pacific Small Island Developing States. Over to you, Ambassador.
Can you hear me?
We hear you well, and we can see you as well. So please go ahead. Very good to have you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for allowing me to make a few remarks. We are deeply thankful to His Royal Highness Prince Albert of Monaco, Paul G. Allen and Family Foundation, and all the impact investors. Deeply thankful to UNDP, UNEP, and UNCDF for bringing together a truly exciting platform which demonstrates the need UN, which is more coherent, more joined up, and capable of bringing the full platform of resources available to the UN for development solutions. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs is the most remarkable and transformative development in blue finance in a generation by far. We know that, as our speakers have said, coral reefs are on the front lines of climate change. And talking just one day after the release of the biodiversity report and its startling conclusions, the launch of this fund could not have been more timely. The mobilization of financing for coral reef protection and for sustainable development is challenging for Fiji and small Pacific Island states at the best of the time. Even though resources are available with the Asian Development Bank, World Bank, and multilateral development banks, accessing them is often very difficult. Accessing them on terms that are favorable are very difficult. And this fund helps countries like Fiji and Pacific small island states overcome that fundamental hurdle. But in congratulating UNDP, UNEP, and UNCDR in setting up the fund and the investors who have provided the resources, the design, as you have seen, is also extremely important. It has a grant window which allows the fund to build stakeholder buy-in to investments, as well as an investment window which allows us to do exciting things. This does not necessarily always mean that countries like Fiji have to look for external resources. Resources can be made available locally. In Fiji, we have already introduced an environmental tax in the tourism sector, for example. And we are considering a range of other measures that are available to us that the fund can help leverage and catalyze. We are working with UNDP in two other exciting ways in Fiji. First is that the fund is already supporting the Great Sea Reef Resilience Program, a truly transformational program in, as my colleague Peter Thompson has said, in one of the richest reef systems in the world by far, and one of the most exposed to climate change. This program is already demonstrating results and impact. It is working with communities, working with the knowledge of the communities, bringing the best of the science as well as the traditional knowledge of communities to practical solutions in protecting biodiversity on the coral reefs and in a whole reef to ridge systems. But Fiji is lifting its gaze even higher. We are developing a blue town concept where we bring all integrated sets of activities on land in coastal towns, such as waste management and use of fertilizers in farms and the upstream activities together for the protection of coral protection and regeneration of coral reefs. And we hope that the fund will be catalytic in driving forward our ambition. But these ambitions are also matched by very practical actions. Fiji maintains its moratorium on deep seabed mining for the whole of the decade of ocean science. We are committed to bringing 100% of our 2 million plus square miles of oceans into a marine protected managed area by 2030, and working with the best of science in taking these to the next level. We hope that the fund will be generously supported because of the way in which it is structured and also its ability to demonstrate quick results. But COVID has also reminded of something else. Several of the solutions to COVID are being derived from marine algae and marine life. If we do not protect our coral reefs, we may indeed be destroying our ability to fight back against future pandemics. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for also giving us this view of possibilities, but also, of course, the challenges in Fiji, but also as a chair of the Pacific Small Island Developing States. And we've been saying throughout this session that small countries can really make a difference, and we are incredibly happy that you are accompanying us in this endeavor, and not least also putting forward some really interesting local examples. And this is how we should make the best use of the platform that we are creating. Now over to you, Penny, to say something again about the investment plan.
Yes, thanks, Ulrika. In order to build a portfolio of projects, the fund is developing a 10-year investment plan that will guide the decisions of the fund's executive board and investment committee. The investment plan will also be central to our campaign to capitalise the fund by identifying a project pipeline and confirming needs. The work is financed by flexible CEDA support to UNDP and implemented by the Conservation Finance Alliance. We realise we've moved through the details of the fund very quickly, so we really encourage you to visit the Global Fund for Coral Reefs website to find out more information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Penny. And rest assured, we will see to that we share all information needed, and never hesitate to look for any of us to see to that you get the information you need. Now, our last speaker, last but not least, is Mr. Simon Dent, the Blue Investment Director at Altelia Funds, part of Mirova National Capital Limited. And through his work with the Sustainable Ocean Fund, he is well familiar with the private sector investments into the blue economy. So over to Mr. Simon Dent as our final speaker in this session.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So good afternoon from London. It's a pleasure to be here today with our partners. I'm Simon Dant, and I'm a principal and founder of the Sustainable Ocean Fund, which is managed by Mirova Natural Capital. Mirova is an investment manager with over $14 billion dedicated to sustainable and natural capital investment by combining long-term value creation with sustainable development. We started work on the Sustainable Ocean Fund in 2016, and over the last 4 years, we have worked hard with like-minded partners to show that there are significant investable opportunities in the blue economy. Our fund was launched in the middle of 2018, and today the fund has total commitments of $132 million and is supported by both development banks and large institutional investors, demonstrating that we are seeing increasing investor interest and appetite for the blue economy. We invest into sustainable and scalable business models, predominantly in developing countries, across sustainable seafood, circular economy, and conservation sectors, with the aim to deliver both financial returns and quantifiable and reportable environmental and social impacts, which contribute directly or indirectly, in fact, to long-term ocean health. Currently, we've made more than $35 million of blue economy investments, and we are actively working on projects representing $70 million of commitments. This including, for example, potential investments in Belize and in Fiji, which will help to protect the coral reefs by reducing runoff and pollution, as well as reinforcing marine protected areas. We have made investments to date in businesses in sustainable aquaculture, plastic and waste recycling, technology to prevent bycatch in fisheries, and ecotourism and blue carbon. The Sustainable Ocean Fund, however, is a private side impact investment vehicle. And whilst we have a partnership with USAID to provide a guaranteed facility for certain loans, our fund does not benefit from a blended finance approach. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs proposed blended finance structure, and importantly, the coordinated approach between the grant and private side facilities will allow the investment teams to direct the right type of finance to the right projects. It will accelerate pipeline development and the making of investments. It will provide projects and local stakeholders with a global network, but also with local resources. And importantly, it will reduce risk and costs for investors. It will also mean that the Global Fund for Coral Reefs private side facility will be able to leverage donor and development capital with private side funds to catalyze the availability of a targeted pool of capital investment for the benefit of the reef ecosystems and their dependent economies. Importantly, such impact investment will also bring with it the requirements by projects to implement best practice, transparency, the protection of the ecosystems, and, for instance, supply chain certifications. And this will bring benefits to all the local stakeholders involved. To date, impact and conservation finance has been heavily weighted towards terrestrial and natural capital. It is said that less than 1% of available conservation capital has found its way to supporting the ocean. At the Sustainable Ocean Fund, we have done a small part to address that issue. Yet, according to the WRI, ocean-related businesses such as fishing, shipping, renewable energy, and tourism comprise up to 7% of global GDP. And this number is expected to double into 2030. Therefore, the ocean and the reefs within it are an undervalued asset. We will not achieve the goal of a sustainable blue economy without realigning existing flows and attracting new sources of investment capital. It is our view at Morova that the damage to the world's coral reefs is already nearly at a tipping point, with more than half of all coral reefs dead or dying, damaged by climate change related temperatures and pollution from intensive farming and urban runoff. The launch of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs is a landmark event that will help fight to curb this damage. We are excited at Morova to join with the other partners to provide our experience in capital raising, originating and structuring ocean-related investments for the benefit of the world's coral reefs and the wildlife and the communities that depend on them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon, for being with us from London, and thank you not least for accompanying us on this important journey that we need to embark on, where we need to see concrete action now. And thank you all of you who have been accompanying us here throughout this session. We have safely achieved our objective. It was our ambition to generate energy and global support for the new Global Fund for the Coral Reefs, which is underpinned by a unique partnership, as we've seen here today, to tackle the underrepresented and underfinanced SDG 14, life below water. The fund represents a new paradigm for protection of an ecosystem on the brink of extinction. It will enhance, if we do this the right way, if we do it together, the resilience of impacted countries and community. This is about people and planet. And it will contribute to greater global security by delivering crucial and coordinate public and private sector finance for the coral reefs conservation. Now, this launch is just the first event of many that will take place during the rest of 2020, even though we really don't know what 2020 will look like in these unprecedented times, and also in 2021. We're only in the beginning of an exciting journey. The next event to spotlight the Global Fund for Coral Reefs will take place in January 2021 at the ECON World Conservation Congress and One Planet Summit, and this will be followed by other events leading up to CBD COP15 in Kunming and reaching a final at the UNFCCC COP26 in Glasgow. You are warmly invited to join us at all these events, and we really would like to see you accompany us and bring others on board as well. So please, as we will share more information with you, see to that we share that information, because we need partnerships. Goal 17 has never been more important, and I think that this is what we have shown throughout this event. So let's see to that we close the funding gap, that we use all our different assets, all our very best ideas to make change happen, to think big, but also do the structural change needed for people and planet and for our oceans, to see to that we have a future with these blooming, blossoming coral reefs that all of us are so fascinated by and that are so important for our livelihoods. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you, colleagues that have accompanied this. And as we've said, never hesitate to contact us at UNDP or the other agencies also supporting this initiative. Thank you very much, and looking forward to see you again. Bye-bye.